What up, yachties? Welcome to part 2 of episode 2. If you haven't watched part 1, check it out here, where we talked about the hierarchy of super yachts and where you may best fit in. We also had a bonus tip where we discussed using your passions to your advantage to make sure you end up doing what you love, not just what you're experienced at. In the end, I think you'll agree with me when I tell you why I would never want to be a super yacht captain. Okay, let's weigh up the different departments and see what comes out on tops. For this example, I'm going to use the 60-meter mega yacht. In reality, you'll likely work on many different size super yachts, but 60-meter yachts are really career builders, and you'll likely work on one at some point in your career. If you look over the graphic here, we have the 5 sections representing 5 categories. So we have the package, which is referring to the salary and the benefits that come along with it, such as leave and any other benefits. We have the responsibility, which is mostly about the overall responsibility you have for the well-being of the crew and guests, in other words, safety. And we have guest accountability, which is the expectation you have to be a communication point with the guests. This shouldn't be overlooked. It's not a given that every person has the ability to interact with the strong personalities that tend to be yacht owners. If you do have this ability, it can be a massive X factor and stand you out amongst the crowd. Work-life balance is looking at the potential you'll have to enjoy the areas the job takes you to. It's no good being a massive travel bug and being in perhaps the Galapagos if you have no time to actually get off the boat and enjoy it. Education, which is referring to the amount of education you must have to obtain a position. Education can represent a massive time and money commitment, and some people simply don't want to make this investment, and I understand that. As you're likely to have to spend upwards of 50,000 euros for a master's ticket, it's something which you must consider. So initially in the foundational years, what's standing out here to me is that Deck have the best work-life balance. And that's closely followed by interior. In your first couple of years in yachting, you'll absolutely work hard, but you're generally given this opportunity to play hard as well. The first year in yachting was perhaps one of the funnest years I've ever had in my life, and this is a pretty common story. Beyond that, why it is mostly ahead of the interior is that the deck role is outdoors, and a lot of the time the job itself just lends itself to being a lot of fun. Chefs and engineers have the most time below deck, and the hours can be quite unsociable with no rotation to make up for that, so they rate it a little bit lower there. The package is still decent. The salary is pretty strong from the outset across the board in yachting, but chefs and engineers will be paid the best initially. Leave is generous in my opinion. You'll always get a month off a year, if not more, but it gets a lot better as you progress in your career to being truly one of the best leave packages worldwide in any job. The education requirements are not high, but engineers may be exceptionally highly educated, coming into the industry with a large merchant navy or military qualification. But they also may have almost no maritime education as well. Perhaps they were a tinkerer or they were an apprentice mechanic that didn't qualify. I've had that as an example from someone before. You do not have to have a strong education to get your foot in the door as an engineer, even if it does help. Chefs are similar. Some will come in with apprenticeships, but at this point, it isn't really a requirement within the industry. Safety responsibility for a chef is pretty high from the outset, and it remains at that level throughout their career, as one food poisoning mishap can spell disaster for a chef's career. Deck has some safety considerations almost immediately as they drive powerful toys and tenders, and they're conducting safety checks as soon as they enter the industry, as well as being very hands-on with the guests, and there being a high risk of potentially injuring either themselves or the guests if they're not educated in that manner. In the 2-year to 5-year range, your career will likely explode in many ways and change a lot. You'll probably enjoy several promotions, which will lead to many dramatic increases in, well, to say the least, responsibility. The thing that stands out here is that everyone's packages increase as the leave time is increasing and salaries are increasing. Rotation starts to become standard for engineering, which is improving their work-life balance to be very competitive. The job still remains challenging, which is why rotation almost becomes a necessity to stave off burnout. You'll actually find about 15 years ago, while there isn't unions within the yachting industry, there was a collaboration between engineers to push for rotation, which is why rotation is so commonplace with the engineering profession. Rotation is when you're given a set amount of time off for the work you put in, taken in a scheduled manner. This actually allows you to plan somewhat your life. If you know the time off you're going to have in advance, then you can schedule things within your normal day-to-day life. The most common and sought after rotation is 2-2, or 2 months on and 2 months off. Other rotations may be available for mid-range interior and deck crew, such as a 3-1 and a 4-2. We'll be talking about rotation at length in future episodes. Responsibility increases here, except for the chefs. That remains constant. They still have to obviously be quite alert for their food that they're producing. Generally, they still have high levels of responsibility, but it's contained within the galley. So it doesn't feel like a large increase to them from their day-to-day job as they progress in their career. Deck in general will have more safety responsibilities, and interior start to be given small safety tasks as well. Guest accountability for chefs as they enter senior roles can range from medium to perhaps very high, depending on the yacht. But it's almost certain that interior members will start to have a very high level of guest accountability. The chief steward or chief stewardess is almost certain to field all disputes and complaints from an owner, even more so than the captain. It's a very stressful role. Work-life balance before rotation becomes a possibility for a chef is potentially at its lowest. Long days with little chance to enjoy themselves over the course of a season. Education requirements for deck increases, chefs remain constant, and engineers will be expected to have a high formal education at this point. Oftentimes, actually, second engineers will have the same qualifications as the chief engineers. So at this point, absolutely high education a necessity for engineers. Finally, after around 4 to 5 years, interior staff, both from a steward position and a chef position, can have achieved a top job if they are perhaps a superstar and the stars have aligned. Deckhand engineers will have been able to achieve an officer position if they've been organised. This is what stands out in the interior roles to me. You can get to the top faster. You'll see the package is strongest for chefs and engineers, with rotation often on offer and strong salaries on offer too. As rotation is not standard for chefs, if they haven't been able to secure a rotation or a large leave package, this could still remain low. At the upper end, there may be some expectation for further education for all departments, including the stewards. Lately, management has been requiring non-critical qualifications to sign off on promotions to interior manager or purser. The big jobs, captain and chief engineer jobs, become available closer to the 10-year experience mark. Often it's longer. Rotation for engineers has been standard at this point for quite some time. If rotation is on offer for the captain, the work-life balance is pretty good. If it's not, which is often the case, even now the work-life balance is exceptionally poor, which is ultimately why I would never want to be a captain. Captains work 24/7. They often have to work for decades before a rotation even becomes a possibility. And ultimately they assume so much responsibility that it would just never be a job that would appeal to me. A great captain once told me, "It's better to be the prince than the king," which basically means being a chief officer is amazing because rotational jobs are so commonplace and the salary is still exceptional. If you actually look at the salary per hour, the chief officer is streets ahead of the captain. That's not to say the job wouldn't appeal to some people. Some people are just born to it, and a life at sea as the captain is the only way to be. So there you have it. Every department has its pros and cons. And whilst you can always change your mind and re-specialize, it makes sense to start down the path you think you'll remain on. I personally think, all things considered, Deck has it best. What do you think? Which job would you like on a super yacht? Let me know in the comments. If you've enjoyed this video, give us a like and a subscribe and enable the notifications. Join us in the next episode of Becoming a Yachtie, where I'll give you the lowdown on what courses and qualifications you actually need, and what extra qualifications beyond the yachting ones are going to stand you out from the crowd. Thanks for being at sea with Ari.